The most powerful man alive woke up every morning and told himself he was nothing. Not as self-pity, not as weakness, as a weapon. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire for nearly 2 decades. He commanded armies. He decided who lived and who died. And every single morning, before the generals, before the court, before the empire demanded its pound of flesh, he sat alone and wrote to himself. Not for an audience, not for history, for survival. A private journal became meditations, and it was never meant to be read by you. That's the first thing most people miss entirely. This wasn't a philosophy book. It wasn't a motivational manual. It was a man, the most powerful man on earth, arguing with his own weakness, dragging himself back from the edge of arrogance, grief, exhaustion, and rage, one sentence at a time.
He wrote lines like,
"You have power over your mind, not outside events, not as inspiration, as a reminder." Because he kept forgetting. Because he was human, exactly like you. Here's what nobody tells you about Marcus Aurelius. He didn't have it figured out. He was afraid of failing. He was surrounded by betrayal. He buried children. He fought a plague that killed 5 million people while simultaneously fighting wars on 2 fronts. And the whole time, the world expected him to be unshakable. Sound familiar? Not the emperor part, the pressure part, the performance part. The part where you carry enormous weight in silence because no one around you can afford to see you break. Where you wake up already tired. Where the version of you that everyone needs is a version you haven't slept enough to be. That's the modern condition. And Marcus Aurelius lived it at a scale most of us will never comprehend. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The stronger Marcus became, the more obsessed he was with his own limitations. Most people do the opposite. They get a little power, a little success, a little comfort, and they stop questioning, they stop growing. They confuse arrival with transformation. Marcus never confused the two. In Meditations, Book 2, he reminds himself that he has seen ambitious men, brilliant men, powerful men, and all of them are gone, forgotten, swallowed by time as completely as if they never existed. Then he asks, so what are you doing with the moment you have? Not as existential despair, as a war cry. This is the part most Stoicism content will never show you. It won't show you the Marcus who almost broke. It won't show you the cost of the philosophy. It's easier to sell you the polished quotes, the clean, quotable wisdom framed in marble. But the real Marcus Aurelius, he was forged in fire he did not choose, wielding a discipline that most people can't even imagine. And the 8 lessons inside Meditations, the ones we're going to walk through together, they're not productivity hacks. They're not morning routine advice. They are battle-tested instructions for how a man survives becoming who he needs to be. Each one will feel obvious at first. Then it will feel personal. Then, if you're honest with yourself, it will feel like an accusation. Because here's the truth about Stoic wisdom. It doesn't give you comfort. It gives you clarity. And clarity, real clarity, shows you exactly where you've been lying to yourself. Exactly which version of your life you keep choosing, because it's easier than the one you actually want. Marcus Aurelius sat alone every morning and chose the harder thing. Not once, not in a single moment of heroic transformation. Every morning.
Over and over. For years, that's not inspiration, that's a method.
And the first lesson inside Meditations is the one that makes all the others possible. It's the one Marcus returns to more than any other, the one ancient Stoics called the foundation, the bedrock beneath every other discipline. Most people get it completely backwards. And that single misunderstanding is costing you more than you realize. You are drowning in things you cannot control. And the worst part? You already know it. You know that refreshing the news won't change the outcome. You know that replaying the argument in your head at 2 a.m. won't rewrite what was said. You know that obsessing over what someone thinks of you, a colleague, an ex, a stranger on the internet, is burning fuel you don't have. You know all of this, and you do it anyway. That's not weakness. That's the default setting of the human mind. An ancient alarm system wired for survival, constantly scanning for threats, constantly trying to control outcomes that were never yours to own. Marcus Aurelius called it the central disease of the untrained mind. Not stupidity, not laziness, disease. Something that spreads quietly, invisibly, until it has consumed the entire day before you noticed it was hungry. The Stoics had a name for the cure, the dichotomy of control. Lesson 1 from Meditations, and the foundation of everything else in this video. Epictetus, the philosopher who shaped Marcus more than almost any other, stated it without decoration. Some things are in our control. Others are not, that's it. The whole teaching. In one breath. But don't let the simplicity fool you. That sentence is a blade. And most people spend their entire lives on the wrong side of it. Here's how the untrained mind works. It treats everything as if it's in your control. The meeting outcome, the other person's reaction, the economy, the timing, the weather of other people's moods. It pours energy into all of it equally, furiously, desperately, and then feels personally betrayed when the world doesn't comply. You've felt this. That specific exhaustion that isn't physical, where you've worked hard, done everything right, and the results still didn't go your way. And instead of grief, which would be clean, you got rage, confusion, that low grinding sense of unfairness that sits in your chest for days. That feeling isn't about the outcome. It's about a broken contract. One you made with reality without reality's agreement. Marcus inherited the most powerful position on earth and immediately began cataloging everything about it he couldn't control. The senators who resented him, the generals who doubted him, the gods who sent plague without warning. He didn't do this to despair. He did it as a map. Because if you know what you can't control, you stop pouring yourself into it. And then, this is where it shifts. You pour everything into what you can. Your attention, your interpretation, your effort, your response. The quality of your character in the moment no one is watching. Marcus writes in Book 6, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't writing that for a poster. He was writing it at war, with soldiers dying, with a plague spreading, with an empire that required a version of him he had to build from scratch every single morning. That's the modern bridge most people miss. You are not running an empire, but you are running something, a career, a family, a reputation, a version of yourself you're trying to maintain under pressure. And every day, without realizing it, you're making the same mistake Marcus warned against. Investing your identity in outcomes instead of effort. Measuring your worth by results instead of by the integrity of how you showed up. And when the results don't come, you don't just feel disappointed. You feel like a failure, like the universe has made a judgment about your value as a person. It hasn't. The universe doesn't know your name. Here's what the dichotomy of control actually does when you internalize it. Not as a quote, but as a daily operating system. It narrows your focus to a razor's edge. Suddenly the question isn't why is this happening to me? It's what is my best possible move right now? The panic becomes clarity. The noise becomes signal. The enormous, crushing weight of everything you've been carrying, most of it just evaporates, because you finally see that you were holding things that were never yours to hold. Marcus practiced this by asking one question every time pressure arrived. Not "can I fix this," but "is this mine to carry?" That question will change more about your life in 30 days than most self-help books will in a decade. But here's what the Stoics discovered, and what Marcus documented in the most uncomfortable section of Meditations. The dichotomy of control only works if you're willing to face something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Something that lives not in the world outside you, but in the version of yourself you've been quietly protecting. Lesson 2 goes somewhere darker and far more powerful. There is a version of you that you perform for the world, and there is the version that exists in the silence after everyone leaves. Marcus Aurelius knew both versions intimately. He was emperor of Rome. Every room he entered rearranged itself around him. Every word he spoke carried the weight of law. Men practiced their expressions before meeting him. Women rehearsed what they would say. The entire machinery of the most powerful civilization on Earth responded to his presence like a compass needle finding north. And alone, in the dark, he wrote, "What am I really?" Not rhetorical, not poetic. A genuine, unsettling question from a man who had everything the world could offer, and still felt the gap between who he appeared to be and who he actually was. That gap is the territory of Lesson 3. And if you're honest with yourself, you already live there. This is the Stoic revelation that changes the entire architecture of how you see yourself. The Stoics called it the inner citadel. Marcus described it in Meditations as the one place no external force could touch. The fortress of the rational mind, the seat of genuine character. Not your reputation, not your achievements, not what your family thinks you are or what your LinkedIn profile claims. The inner citadel is who you are when the performance ends. Most people have never visited it. Not because they're shallow, because visiting requires something most people won't do. A reckoning with the distance between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. The mind, being efficient, will do almost anything to avoid that particular discomfort. It will stay busy. It will stay distracted. It will scroll and consume and produce noise at an industrial scale rather than sit for 5 minutes in genuine silence with itself. You know this feeling. That uneasy restlessness when the phone is across the room and the house is quiet and there's suddenly nothing between you and your own thoughts. That mild, sourceless anxiety that has no object, no name, just a pressure. That pressure is the door to the inner citadel. Marcus walked through it every morning. He didn't journal as therapy. He journaled as excavation, deliberately digging beneath the performance layer to find the bedrock of actual character. And what he found there, he didn't always like. He writes in Meditations about his own tendency toward vanity, his hunger for praise, his irritation at small inconveniences despite understanding their insignificance. He doesn't romanticize these discoveries. He catalogues them like an engineer cataloging structural weaknesses before a storm. Because you cannot fix what you refuse to see. Lesson 4 lives here. And it's the one most modern self-improvement culture actively runs from. Marcus writes, "The first rule is to keep an untroubled spirit. The second is to look things in the face and know them for what they are." That second rule is the one nobody wants. Looking things in the face. Not through the filter of your best-case interpretation. Not wrapped in the comfortable story you've been telling yourself about why things are the way they are. Just the thing, as it is. Here's the translation. That relationship you're staying in not from love, but from fear of being alone. That career you're building not from purpose, but from the need to prove something to someone who stopped watching years ago. That version of success you're chasing because it's the one your parents described, not the one your actual nature is built for. Marcus would not let himself look away from these truths. He considered self-deception a form of cowardice, a slow, quiet surrender disguised as stability. And here is where it strikes hardest. The inner citadel isn't built through strength. It isn't built through discipline or willpower or the kind of grinding effort that looks impressive from the outside. It's built through honesty, specifically the honesty to separate what you genuinely value from what you've been conditioned to perform. That distinction between authentic value and performed value is the fault line in most people's lives. On one side, the choices that feel meaningful, aligned, costly in the right ways. On the other, the choices that look right, photograph well, earn approval, and leave you quietly hollow. Marcus chose the first path not once but daily, against enormous temptation, against a world that would have celebrated the performance and never questioned the interior. He chose it because he understood something about time that most people don't absorb until it's almost too late. The citadel either gets built deliberately, or it gets built by default, from whatever is left after the performance collapses. And for most people, it does collapse. Lesson 5 is about what happens in that collapse. What the Stoics found in the wreckage. A truth about transformation so precise, it will rearrange how you think about every difficult season of your life. It's waiting in part 4. Every hard thing that has ever happened to you was trying to give you something. You just weren't ready to receive it. Marcus Aurelius lost his father at 3 years old. He was adopted by an emperor who groomed him for a throne he never asked for. He buried multiple children. He watched his most trusted general betray him. He inherited a plague, 2 simultaneous wars, and an empire bleeding from every border, all within the first years of his reign. And instead of being destroyed by any of it, he wrote this in Meditations. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That sentence has been printed on posters and phone cases and gym walls across the world. And almost everyone who reads it misses what it actually costs to mean it. It doesn't mean obstacles are secretly blessings. It doesn't mean suffering has a silver lining if you stay positive. Marcus wasn't a motivational speaker. He was a man standing in the ruin of things he loved, choosing, not feeling, choosing to extract direction from destruction. That's lesson 5. And it's the hinge everything else turns on. The Stoics practiced something called Amor Fati, love of fate. Not acceptance of fate, not tolerance of fate. Love. The active, deliberate decision to not just endure what happens but to want it, because it is the only raw material you have been given, and wasting it on resistance is the one loss you choose for yourself. This will feel wrong at first. It should. Because somewhere inside you, there is a version of your life you believe should have happened. The relationship that should have lasted. The opportunity that should have been yours. The timeline that got interrupted by loss, by failure, by someone else's decision that rearranged everything without your consent. And you've been carrying a low-grade grief about that unlived life, not heavy enough to address, but constant enough to color everything. Marcus called this the great theft. Not what fate took from you, but what you gave to mourning a reality that never existed. Lesson 6 is where the practical work begins. In Meditations, Book 4, Marcus describes a practice modern psychology would later call cognitive reframing. But Marcus practiced it at a depth that makes the therapeutic version look like a rough sketch. He would take every obstacle, every loss, every humiliation, and ask one question. What does this make possible that wasn't possible before? Not what did this cost me? What did this open? A failed venture teaches market reality that no MBA can simulate. A relationship ending forces the excavation of needs you'd buried under compromise. A period of illness strips the non-essential with a ruthlessness no productivity system can match. The question isn't whether these things hurt. They do. The question is whether the hurt becomes data or just damage. Marcus chose data every time, not because he was built differently, because he practiced the choice until it became reflex. Here is the weight of this in the modern world. You are living in an era of infinite distraction designed, engineered, actually, to keep you from sitting with difficulty long enough to extract its intelligence. Every hard emotion now has an immediate exit. Scroll past it, numb it, cover it with a highlight reel of someone else's curated life. The result is a generation of people who are extraordinarily skilled at avoiding pain and completely unprepared for the transformation that only pain can deliver. Marcus had no such exits, and it made him unbreakable. Lesson 7 is quieter. It might be the most dangerous one. It's about proximity, specifically who you allow close enough to shape your thinking, without your awareness. Marcus writes in Meditations with startling bluntness about the people who drain clarity, those who trade in complaint, who perform cynicism as sophistication, who mistake chaos for depth. He didn't moralize about them. He simply noted their effect on his thinking and built distance accordingly. Not cruelty. Architecture. You become the quality of thinking you spend the most time inside. Not the people themselves, their thinking, the questions they ask, the things they find worth discussing, the ceiling they've quietly placed on what's possible and then called realism. Marcus understood that the inner citadel isn't just defended from outside events. It's defended from the slow infiltration of borrowed smallness. Audit who you think alongside. It is the least visible and most consequential decision you make. Lesson 8 is the one Marcus returned to most in his final years. The one that binds every previous lesson into a single, irreducible truth about what it means to live well in a world that will not cooperate. It doesn't come from triumph. It doesn't come from discipline. It comes from something far simpler and far rarer than either. Part 5 reveals it, and it will land differently than you expect. Marcus Aurelius died in a military camp on the banks of the Danube River. Not in a palace, not surrounded by marble and ceremony, on campaign, in the field, still working. He was 58 years old. He had ruled for 19 years. And the last entry scholars believe he ever wrote contains no triumph, no summary, no final wisdom wrapped in a bow. Just a man, still asking himself whether he had lived according to his values that day. not whether he had won. Whether he had been true. That is lesson 8, and it is the one that makes every other lesson survivable. The Stoics called it eudaimonia, but not in the way modern culture packages it. Not happiness, not success, not the feeling of having arrived somewhere safe and permanently good. The Greeks meant something closer to flourishing in accordance with your deepest nature. The aliveness that comes from living in full alignment with what you actually are, rather than the shape the world pressed you into. Most people never find it, not because it's rare, because it requires the one thing modern life works hard to take from you: stillness. Not the absence of motion, the presence of clarity. The quality of attention that only arrives when you stop performing, stop optimizing, stop measuring your days against someone else's curated life, and simply ask the question Marcus asked every morning in the cold, before Rome woke up and needed something from him. Who am I trying to become today? And did yesterday's version of me move toward that or away from it? That's the whole practice. Distilled. Everything in meditations, all 8 lessons, all the philosophy forged in war and plague and loss and pressure, collapses into that single daily question. Not a grand transformation, not a dramatic reinvention. A daily, honest, private accounting of the distance between who you are and who you're capable of being. The cost of not asking it is invisible at first. A day here, a week there. Choices made by default instead of design. A life slowly assembled from what was easiest rather than what was truest. And then one morning, years later, you look at what you've built. The career, the relationships, the habits, the version of yourself that shows up in the world, and you feel the specific grief of a person who has been busy but not deliberate. Marcus Aurelius was afraid of that grief. It is why he wrote every morning. Not because writing felt good, because the silence of not writing felt like surrender. Here is what these 8 lessons taken together are really saying. Control is not power. Awareness is. The man who knows exactly what he can and cannot influence and acts with full force only within that boundary, that man is undefeatable. Not because nothing bad happens to him, because nothing that happens to him can take his direction. The inner citadel is not built in moments of ease. It's built in the moments when ease was available and you chose difficulty anyway. When you chose honesty over comfort. When you chose growth over approval. When you chose the question over the answer, because you knew the question would take you somewhere the answer never could. Obstacles are not interruptions to your life. They are the primary material your character is made from. You don't find out who you are in the good seasons. You find out in the collapse, in what you choose to do with what remains. The people closest to your thinking shape the ceiling of your becoming. Choose them with the same care you would choose a surgeon, not for their warmth, for the quality of mind they bring into contact with yours. And all of it, every discipline, every practice, every Stoic principle hammered into habit, it exists in service of one thing: showing up fully to the one life you actually have. Not the life you were supposed to have. Not the life that would have existed if things had gone differently. This one, with its specific losses and its specific gifts and its irreplaceable, unrepeatable window of time. Marcus Aurelius died still trying to get it right. That is not a tragedy, that is the model. If something in this video landed, if one of these lessons named something you've been carrying without words, share it with someone who needs it. Not as content, as a signal. Someone in your life is quietly struggling under weight they haven't named yet. This might be the thing that helps them find the question that changes their direction. Like this video if these ideas deserve to travel further. Subscribe to Stoic Origin. Not because you need more content, but because you've decided to take your own thinking seriously. And that decision deserves a community built around the same commitment.
Marcus Aurelius never stopped asking the question. Neither should you.